Megan sighed, placing her coffee cup down with deliberate hesitation. The cafe was quiet, filled only with the soft hum of conversation and the occasional clink of ceramic on wood. She had chosen this place for a reason. It was their spot, the one they had been coming to for years. A familiar battlefield for what she assumed would be a victorious confrontation. "Maybe we need a break," she said finally, her voice carefully modulated to sound both uncertain and firm. She wanted it to land just right, like a challenge, like bait. Jason looked up from his coffee, his expression as unreadable as ever. His dark eyes studied her for a moment before he simply nodded. Oh, that was it. No hesitation, no confusion, just a single, calm acceptance. Megan felt her chest tighten. "I just think we need some space, to figure things out." Jason exhaled through his nose, as if considering it, then gave a small shrug. "If that's what you want." She blinked. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She had imagined something else entirely. Him, frowning, reaching for her hands, pleading to understand why. She had expected a reaction, some proof that she was still the center of his world. She had seen it before, in other men, in old boyfriends who had stumbled over themselves to fix things the moment she pulled away. But Jason just leaned back in his chair, took another sip of coffee, and looked out the window as if this conversation was already over. Megan swallowed, shifting slightly. "So, I guess we'll see how things go?" Jason set his cup down. "Sure." She hated how steady he was, how completely unfazed. She reached for her phone, pretending to check a message, anything to fill the sudden, unexpected silence between them. Her stomach twisted uncomfortably. This wasn't what she had prepared for. "You're not going to, ask me to reconsider?" she finally said, trying to lace her voice with something light, teasing even. Jason lifted a brow as if amused by the question. "Why would I?" Her lips parted, but she had no immediate response. Jason's gaze was calm, steady. "If you're already halfway out the door, Megan, what's the point of me trying to pull you back in?" Her breath caught. For the first time since she had sat down, since she had crafted this conversation in her head, she felt something shift. She wasn't in control anymore. The script she had written was unraveling in front of her, slipping from her hands like sand through her fingers. She forced a small laugh. "Wow, that's cold." Jason didn't flinch. "No, it's honest." He glanced at his watch, then back at her. "Are we done here?" Megan's throat was dry. "Yeah," she said, even though it wasn't supposed to feel like this. A week later, she walked into their cafe again, except this time, Jason wasn't alone, and that's when she realized she had made a mistake. Megan had spent the first few days after their conversation waiting. At first, she had been confident. She knew Jason. He was steady, reliable, the kind of man who didn't let go easily. It was one of the things she had liked about him. His consistency, the quiet way he showed his devotion. She had expected that devotion to extend to this moment. She had expected late-night texts asking if she was okay, a call just to hear her voice, maybe even an unexpected knock on her door. But the silence stretched on. By day 3, the confidence began to waver. She found herself reaching for her phone more often, unlocking it without thinking, scrolling through her messages with an irritated frown. Nothing, not a single missed call, no unread texts. Jason's name remained exactly where it was, untouched, unchanged. She tapped on their chat, staring at the last message he had sent days ago. It had been so normal, so effortless. Just a simple, "see you later," except now, it didn't feel normal. It felt final. Megan told herself that maybe he needed time, maybe he was just being stubborn, waiting for her to reach out first. That thought helped for a little while. But by the 5th day it was getting harder to ignore the sinking feeling in her chest. She checked social media, something she normally wouldn't have done. Jason wasn't the type to post often, but she figured she might catch a glimpse of him through mutual friends. Instead, what she found unsettled her even more. There was nothing about him that indicated heartbreak. His life had continued, uninterrupted. One of his friends had posted a photo from a weekend get-together, a casual gathering, just a few people playing pool and laughing over drinks. Jason was there, leaning against the bar, relaxed, completely at ease. There was no sign of the quiet devastation she had imagined. He wasn't sulking, drowning himself in self-pity, or drinking away the pain. He looked fine. Megan clenched her jaw, locking her phone and tossing it onto the couch beside her. Fine. If he wanted to play it cool, she could too. But the silence had begun to gnaw at her, a quiet, persistent irritation that refused to fade. She had wanted space, not indifference. She had wanted to see him fight for her, to remind her why she had chosen him in the first place. Instead, it was as if she had never mattered at all. On the 6th day, she went out with friends, determined to shake the feeling off. She laughed louder than usual, took more photos than she needed to, posted stories on Instagram just to prove to herself, more than anyone else, that she was having a great time. But even in the middle of the crowded bar, surrounded by people, she caught herself glancing at her phone. Nothing. By the 7th day, she couldn't take it anymore. Megan walked into their usual cafe, the one where she had broken the news to Jason, the one she had expected to be filled with the ghosts of their conversations. She had come there thinking that maybe she'd run into him, that he'd be sitting there alone, looking like a man with unfinished business, waiting for her to come back and admit she had been wrong. But Jason wasn't alone. Megan stopped just inside the entrance, her breath catching in her throat. There he was, seated at their usual table, but across from him sat another woman, Sophia Bennett. Megan recognized her instantly, though she couldn't quite remember from where. Sophia was striking in a way that wasn't forced. She wasn't overly made up, wasn't wearing anything flashy, yet she had a kind of effortless presence. She looked comfortable, warm, like someone who didn't need to demand attention to have it naturally fall on her. And Jason was laughing. Not just any laugh. The kind of laugh that came easily, one that wasn't forced or polite, but real. It was the same laugh Megan had once loved hearing, the one she had thought belonged to her alone. Megan's hands curled into fists. This wasn't right. He was supposed to be heartbroken. He was supposed to be struggling without her, realizing that losing her was the worst thing that had ever happened to him. He was supposed to be lost, but instead he had moved on. And for the first time since she had uttered the words, "Maybe we need a break," Megan realized she had never truly considered what would happen if Jason didn't chase her, because she had never thought he would. But now, as she stood there, watching him lean in slightly as Sophia spoke, watching the way his expression was so open, so light, Megan felt something she had never expected to feel: regret. Megan felt rooted to the spot, her breath shallow, her fingers trembling at her sides. The cafe buzzed around her, the scent of freshly brewed coffee filling the air, but all she could focus on was the man sitting at their table. The man who, just a week ago, had been hers. Jason had always been steady, predictable in a way she once took for granted. She had assumed that even in the worst-case scenario, even if she had pushed him too far, there would be a lingering sadness in his eyes, a hesitance in his step, something, anything, to suggest that her absence had left a void. Instead, he looked free. And that stung more than she could have ever imagined. She didn't recognize this version of him. He wasn't staring longingly into the distance, drowning in memories of their time together. He wasn't wallowing in self-doubt, waiting for her to come back and fix things. No, he was here, in this very cafe, effortlessly engaged in conversation with another woman, Sophia. The name rang faintly in Megan's memory, but it wasn't until she studied her more closely that the pieces clicked. Sophia had always been around the edges of their world, never intrusive, never seeking attention, but present, a friend of a friend. Someone Megan had dismissed as unimportant, harmless. Yet, as she watched them now, she realized how wrong she had been. Sophia had a quiet confidence, a way of sitting that made her look entirely at ease, as if she belonged wherever she was. She wasn't performing. She wasn't trying to impress Jason with overly rehearsed gestures or flirtatious glances. She was just there, being herself. And Jason? He was completely absorbed in her. Megan's chest tightened. Jason had never looked at her like that, not in a long time. The easy way he leaned forward, the genuine way he smiled at something Sophia said. It was effortless. There was no tension, no underlying need to prove something, just two people enjoying each other's company, unaffected by the weight of the past. And for the first time, Megan felt something she never thought she would. Panic. Her stomach twisted as she tried to steady her breathing. But the more she watched, the worse it got. She had been so sure of herself when she suggested the break, so sure he would be waiting, that he would spend his nights thinking of her, missing her, wondering how to win her back. But Jason hadn't done any of that. Instead, he had walked away without hesitation, and now it was too late. Megan's fingers twitched toward her phone before she even realized what she was doing. A text, a casual one, something to remind him that she still existed, that she was still an option. But then Jason laughed again, his eyes meeting Sophia's in a way that made Megan feel invisible. For the first time, she understood. She wasn't an option anymore. She had been replaced. Megan's pulse pounded in her ears as she turned away from the sight of Jason and Sophia. Her fingers clenched around the strap of her purse, her breath coming quicker than she wanted to admit. She had to get out of there. She needed air, space. Anything to silence the realization crashing down on her. She practically stumbled out of the cafe, her heels clicking against the pavement as she stepped onto the sidewalk. The cool afternoon breeze should have been refreshing, but instead it only amplified the heat rising to her face. She could still see them in her mind. Jason, relaxed, leaning in slightly, a small smirk playing on his lips as he listened to Sophia speak. That was supposed to be her seat, her moment. She pulled out her phone without thinking, her thumb hovering over Jason's name. A text, a simple one, something neutral, just to remind him that she was still here. "Hey, hope you're doing well." She typed it out, staring at the words, waiting for them to feel right. But they didn't. What was she hoping to accomplish? Did she really think Jason would see her message and suddenly realize he missed her? That he would drop everything, apologize for not reaching out, and come running back? The thought was ridiculous, because Jason didn't chase. He never had. That was part of what had drawn her to him in the first place, his quiet confidence, the way he never let anyone manipulate him. And yet, she had foolishly believed she could be the exception, that she could dangle her absence like a challenge, only for him to break first. But Jason had called her bluff. Her grip tightened on her phone, and before she could stop herself, she erased the message. Instead, she opened Instagram. If Jason wasn't going to come to her, then maybe she could make him remember what he was missing. She scrolled through her photos, picking the best one. A shot from last weekend taken at a rooftop bar, the city lights glowing behind her. She looked stunning, confident, effortlessly happy. She added a caption that seemed breezy and carefree. "Love a good night out." The moment she posted it, a rush of satisfaction hit her. He would see it, he would remember. Maybe he would feel something. Regret, longing, a twinge of jealousy, but the feeling faded almost immediately. Jason wasn't the type to react to things like this. He wouldn't analyze her post, wonder what it meant, or spend his night debating whether or not to reach out. He had already made his decision. He had moved forward. Megan inhaled sharply, forcing herself to keep walking. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly powerless, and it terrified her. That night, Megan lay in bed staring at her phone, the screen dimly lighting her face. Her post had gathered its usual likes and comments. Friends hyping her up, acquaintances leaving fire emojis, even a few messages from men she had barely spoken to, but none of them were the ones she wanted to hear from. Jason hadn't liked the post, hadn't viewed her story, hadn't reached out. The realization settled deep in her stomach, a hollow ache spreading through her chest. She had been so sure he would notice, that even if he didn't say anything, he would at least pause for a moment, take in the sight of her and remember what he had lost. But no, Jason wasn't looking back. He had already turned the page. A bitterness she didn't recognize twisted inside her. Why wasn't he struggling the way she was? Why wasn't he feeling the weight of their history, the way it clung to her like a ghost she couldn't shake? She had been prepared for a game of longing, a slow burn of regret that would inevitably lead them back together. But Jason had rewritten the script entirely. Her phone vibrated, breaking her thoughts. A text. For a second, her heart leapt. But it wasn't from Jason. "Hey stranger, been a while, drink soon?" It was from Tyler, an old flame. Someone she had kept in her orbit for moments exactly like this. Someone who was always willing to remind her that she was desired, that she could have anyone she wanted. She almost responded, almost let herself fall into the comfort of old patterns, of knowing she could still have control over someone. But as she stared at the message, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, something inside her shifted. This wasn't what she wanted. It wasn't about Tyler. It wasn't about validation. It was about Jason. About the way he had walked away without hesitation. About how he had refused to give her the reaction she had expected. And that was what hurt the most. With a slow exhale, she locked her phone and set it face down on the nightstand. Minutes passed. Maybe an hour. And then, impulsively, she picked it up again. She opened their old messages, scrolling back through the months of easy conversation, of inside jokes, of moments that had once felt unshakable. Her chest tightened. And then, finally, she typed the word she had been resisting. "I think we made a mistake." She hesitated only for a second before hitting send. The message delivered instantly. And then, nothing. No typing bubble, no immediate response. just silence. Megan stared at the screen, waiting. Minutes passed, then an hour, and then, finally, Jason's reply came. She felt a flicker of hope, until she opened it. Message deleted. Jason had seen her words and erased them. Without another thought, Megan turned off her phone and sank into the quiet of her own regret.